now. All right, perfect. Now we're recording. So again, as I was saying, thank you for joining us today for this FOSS4G webinar. And today, Dr. Diane Fritz is going to talk to us from the Auraria Library in the CU Denver campus here in downtown Denver. So that's, she will tell us about the work she has been doing there in the library. Very interesting work in several dimensions. So as you notice, when you join the webinar, your microphones are muted. And if, to pop up the menu in the Zoom interface, you roll your mouse over the lower part of the interface and a menu pops up. And you will see on the lower left a mic icon and a camera icon. So if at the end of the presentation you have questions, you can do them by turning on your mic or by using the chat icon that also is there part of the menu at the bottom. Towards the center, you will see a chat little bubble. So please feel free to use each of those mechanisms to ask questions when we are done with the presentation. So thank you, Diane, again for taking the time to be with us today. And I will let you go ahead. I will have asked Diane to please introduce herself in terms of her background and experience and how she came to use FOSS4G. And then she will go on to present her ideas and experiences. Thank you, Diane.
Hi, all right, so I'm gonna share my screen. And I'm really happy to talk to all of you today about my perspectives on FOSS4G. And as Raphael mentioned, I work as the Geospatial Services Specialist, it's a mouthful to say, at the Auraria Library. And this campus is kind of interesting because we actually host 3 higher education institutions on this campus. There's the University of Colorado, Denver, which hosts Dr. Moreno's FOSS4G lab. We also have Metropolitan State University and Denver Community College. So my job is kind of fun and interesting because I have a really wide range of students and faculty to interact with and connect to with that setup. And it's unique in the country, I believe, where an academic library has more than one institution that we serve. And we have over 50,000 students here. Not that I see that many people, but. So today what I'd like to talk about is using my role in the library and an organization called MapTime that some of you may have heard about or not, to spread the word of FOSS4G among people that are interested in learning geospatial technology. And I was inspired on this topic partly because I was on a Twitter conversation through GIS chat, and a peer of mine at UC Davis, Dr. Michelle Tobias, mentioned that through her MapTime Davis is how most people, or a lot of people on her campus, get exposure to software like QGIS and other free and open source areas. And I thought, wow, that really speaks to me. And I want to share this story because I think it's not just my position that this happens in different places. So free and open source software and libraries and MapTime go really well together. And I want to talk about how to pull all of those things together. So before I do that, oh, interesting. Let's see. My laptop just froze and I can't screen advance right now. There we go. I want to go into my background just a little bit. And my background is not always just in geospatial software. I actually came from the earth sciences. And I ended up discovering GIS with a project that needed that kind of tool to work on it. And I was listening to a Mappiest Hour podcast where Paul Ramsey was a guest. And he said something that really struck a chord with me. He found GIS for an applied job purpose as well. And he said that that gave him, and I'm paraphrasing, kind of a good perspective on just knowing what the applications are and what the things that you can do with it. And it makes you understand what you want to try and do and then go find the tools that make that work. And I think that worked for me too, where I was just trying to understand spatial data, and it made me fairly software agnostic. I was working definitely in ArcGIS Esri Stack at the time, but the reasons for why I was getting into geospatial gave me a just click on a button to do this sort of approach to it. So after I learned that, I ended up being a lecturer at CU Boulder for a while, and I taught an introduction to GIS course for geologists, which was really, really fun. And all of my students had that same drive of they had a project that they wanted to work on, and then they just needed to figure out a tool that helped them do spatial. But I didn't actually run into FOSS4G software until I joined MapTime Boulder. And through that, I discovered QGIS and other kinds of software and techniques through that group. So then I became the Geospatial Services Specialist here at Auraria Library. And right when, around that time, the person who was running MapTime Boulder in coordination with my now co-host Jennings Anderson, one of the founders was moving to San Francisco, and I didn't want to see it die. And so I decided to help out, be part of that group. And then when I was here at Auraria Library, MapTime Mile High was being run by some students that have since graduated. And they were just like, oh, we're leaving. Diane, can you take this over? And I thought, yeah, that this will be a great place to build a geospatial community on campus. Side note, one of those graduated students, Rachel Stevenson, is actually working in the national chapter of MapTime just to keep it going and organized from that top-down piece. So what actually is MapTime? MapTime is an open learning environment for all levels and degrees of knowledge, offering intentional educational support for the beginner. MapTime is simultaneously flexible and structured, creating a space for mapping tutorials, workshops, ongoing projects with a shared goal, and independent collaborative work time. So what it is just kind of a social group of people that want to get together and make maps and figure out different kinds of technologies to do that and trade ideas in a really, really casual setting. I've heard it described as kind of a mix of a hack fest and a knitting circle. So that's what MapTime's core feeling is just helping share ideas and being a really welcoming space for beginners to learn things. So the website, and you can go to it, is just maptime.io, and there's a lot of great information there. And one of the things that you can see there is a map of all of the chapters that exist across the globe. So when I took this screenshot, it actually shows that there are about 100 chapters that exist. There's a lot of variety in them. So this one around the Knoll Island space, there actually is a sort of farcical MapTime called Knoll Island. But a lot of these have a lot of richness and energy behind them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of them and what I find inspiring. But Beth Schechter was the founder of MapTime, and her original chapter started in San Francisco. And since then, it's just exploded. So if you go to MapTime.io, and one of these menu items up on their website is start a chapter. And so we can talk about that more a little bit later. So some of the chapters that I want to highlight and talk about is some of the ones that I have familiarity with, or some that I've poked around in and found some really good resources. So as I mentioned, MapTime Boulder, I had joined it right when some of the leadership was leaving. And I now run it with Jennings Anderson, who is a doctoral student in the computer sciences at CU Boulder. And before I started at Auraria Library, he mentioned, I think a lot of our members are CU Boulder students that come here because they want to learn something other than just the Esri stack. And that, to be honest, was why I was there. So it kind of has that nuance and space in it. And so I do that a bit here at a MapTime Mile High. Like I mentioned, it was being run by students, and they were doing kind of great little sessions on introduction to R, or how do you use PostGIS and different kinds of tools like this. So in addition to taking it over to keep it running, it's great for me because I get to keep learning all of these things that I can help provide to other students as they come into the library asking for help. So MapTime Davis is one that I really want to talk about because I mentioned Dr. Tobias. She was the one who had that tweet about, well, I think a lot of the FOSS4G exposure comes from the MapTimes that I host. And I asked her to share a story of something that was really important to her from her MapTime. So I'm just going to read that to you right now. One of the more powerful stories I have from MapTime Davis is that a research staff person who had extensive experience with ArcGIS came to one of my sessions about spatial SQL, where I taught the basics of the spatial database querying with SpatialLite and QGIS. She had a very large data set, and analysis in the graphical tool was taking a really, really long time. So the timing of the workshop for this researcher was excellent. After learning the basics, she came to Michelle's drop-in hours fairly regularly to get questions answered and learn about more complicated queries. She set up a PostGIS database, loaded in data, and did a pretty complex analysis. After she finished her project, she told me that the workshop and the one-on-one help has changed her career and given her a marketable skill that she will continue to use. So that's a story from MapTime Davis that Michelle shared with me. And in a similar vein, some of the help that I end up doing for students really has come from things that I've learned through MapTimes. For example, just working with OpenStreetMap data a lot more. I had a student come in that was from the city planning and urban design department, and she was trying to find GIS data on some cities in the Netherlands and looking for open data portals and things like that. And we found some, but I also knew that with the quick OSM plugin that you could go into QGIS, use that plugin in there, pull OpenStreetMap data, and get a lot of really rich resources that's community served, but because of the mapping community in that region of the world, you get some pretty solid data that you can work with. So it's really nice to have all of these perspectives. So a couple of other MapTimes that I want to mention really quick. MapTime Seattle, they have a really, really great GitHub page that has a lot of tutorials loaded up that you can go and look at. MapTime Amsterdam has amazing guest speakers that come and talk to them. They probably have a budget for it or try and pull people as they're sort of traveling through. MapTime Salzburg is really active. They post a lot of videos in English, which is good for people like me to be able to get that information, talking about how to use Jupyter notebooks and all sorts of fun things. But then there are different kinds of MapTimes too. So MapTime Tanzania, as far as I can tell, is really sort of a support network for a very concerted project in Dar es Salaam about mapping flooding for that particular region, and they're very focused on OpenStreetMap data and mapping their region to do really good community care in that space. So your MapTime chapter can be what it is. And so when I say your MapTime chapter, one of the things that I want to talk about today, in addition to describing what MapTime is telling you how to set one up and ideas that you might use for different tutorials and sessions that you have. But in addition to that, which I'll get to next, I want to just talk about my role in the library and how free and open source software is fairly important in libraries in general. So libraries, they have a mission of information access. And my role as a geospatial specialist is the information of geospatial data and geospatial technology. And that's what I try to do is serve students coming in here to find the information that they want in data or the different kinds of software tools that will work really well for the project that they're trying to do. So I mentioned earlier that Auraria Library serves 3 different institutions, and some of those institutions have a really, really high enrollment of first-generation college students. And the reason why I mention that is we have students that are here, but they feel a bit intimidated by academia and hoops that you have to jump through to do certain things, like maybe get a license for proprietary software, for example. And so having something like QGIS that they can pull down for free and know that they have access to something like that is very comforting and approachable for them. Also, I have a colleague at CU Boulder. He's the geospatial librarian up there. His name is Phil White, and he mentioned to me that his take is people that aren't in departments that tend to use GIS software a lot, so the geography, the earth sciences people, if you get away from those departments and you're working with humanities departments, they feel less intimidated about approaching free and open source softwares because they don't have that, oh, this is for you. No, I can just go ahead and do that and start playing with it on my own time and feel really comfortable with it. So that's all very academic library, but public libraries have a really strong role in MapTimes, from my perspective, at least, as well. So I am helping run 2 MapTimes right now. One is MapTime Mile High, that's here, and I often host it in this library. But MapTime Boulder is another one that I run, and the Boulder Public Library has rooms that I tend to reserve for that meetup whenever we need a place with a screen. And that's it's a really, really great resource. And so MapTimes can also, as Michelle's story showed, launch further interactions with researchers from those conversations that you have in that meeting, and then you can follow in deeper with research consultations and help people dive into the software really well. So what I do here at Auraria Library is has a lot of different hats to it in a way. One, I teach workshops. Sometimes we've hosted them in the library, but I can also bring these to individual faculty to their classes and share them with their students. And I always start with QGIS just because of that approachability. There are times when I will look at something that ArcGIS has if there's a very particular tool that is applicable to that research project, but more often than not, just having something that the students can load onto their family computers at home is really a great way to go. I do a lot of research consultations here, and a lot of my exposure to different students and faculty is through something that you probably have not heard of, this logo that you may not recognize. This one, yes, you would recognize. This is called the Data to Policy Project, and our library has built this framework for getting open data to students right now under the topics of housing and policing, and having them kind of crunch through that data using all sorts of different tools and come out with policy proposals. So sometimes when I'm working with these students, they get really interested in the spatial aspect of these things, and I introduce them to QGIS and other kinds of tools that they can use through that. So through data support, I'm also, this is a pie in the sky long-term project here, but I am trying to build a geoportal on campus in cooperation with Phil White up at CU Boulder and other academic institutions around the state. And this is very based on open geo-metadata and geo-blacklight, and trying to just have that open platform of sharing information. And so I do the standard drop-in help, email and in person, and just try to expose as many researchers to spatial approaches to their projects as I can. So that's kind of an overview of the activities that I do. And one of the activities is hosting that MapTime Mile High, where I'm trying to bring these researchers together in the library and interact with our professional GIS community in the Metro Denver area. So MapTime Mile High is that venue that I hope to just kind of keep rolling. And as we were talking a little bit before we started recording this, there are a number of meetups around the Denver area that I'm part of, and trying to coordinate the topics with MapTime Mile High and some of these other ones. There's OpenStreetMap Colorado meetup and a whole bunch of different things where you can coordinate and just start building community for sharing FOSS4G type of technology. So if starting a MapTime chapter is something you might want to do if there isn't one in your region. Like I said, you can go to MapTime.io and kind of look to see where chapters exist, see if they're active. If there's one near you, yay, just go and attend and contribute. That's a great way to keep these things going. If there isn't one, you can click on Start a Chapter at this website and start initiating one in your own region. So I go through meetup groups to advertise these, but that's not necessary. It's just a very common way that a lot of people get the word out about MapTime's existing, because anybody that's logged into meetup.com and they've indicated their interest is, I like maps, or I like technology. If you start your meetup group, they'll just get hit with an announcement, hey, there's this new meetup group in your area called MapTime XXX, think about joining it. So that's an avenue to starting it. So another thing is finding a space where to host that meetup. I mentioned the two that I run are largely in libraries. I'm lucky in that I can use the academic library space that I have here for MapTime Mile High. We have this big, huge wall called the Discovery Wall, where we can, it's 9 screens all stacked on top of each other, and we can look at beautiful maps and spatial data while munching on food. It's a nice setup. The meeting rooms at Boulder Public Library are have one big screen in it and nice workrooms, and so maybe there's a library like that near where you are that you could do this. But also it's really nice to just find a meeting room at a restaurant venue, perhaps, where they might have a screen and technology, or sometimes meeting at a brewery attracts other types of people to come out, and just kind of mixing up the spaces that you get together and build that social network for your MapTime is a good way to go. Bring snacks. People always like food, especially if you're trying to appeal to poor, starving college students. Having pizza every once in a while is a good idea. And then picking topics, setting up a few to get it rolling, but then asking your people what they want to learn about is a really good way to keep that interest going. And I'll talk a little bit about different ways of doing that with tips and tricks, but it's really important to make sure you find who your people are and that you together build what your MapTime should be about. And then also you'll want to line up volunteer teachers, because trying to do all of it on your own can feel a little overwhelming and you might start burning out. So being able to get the guest speakers or just ask people, hey, you know how to do R really well. Can you just throw together a little tutorial lesson plan, or pick one off of somebody else's GitHub repo and share that and just kind of distribute that information. That would be great. It takes some of that pressure off of having to do everything. So in the next slides, I'm going to just share some of the things that I have done for MapTimes in the past. And like I said, asking your members is a really good way to know where you should go with your MapTime. This is actually a list that I got directly off of MapTime Seattle's survey. They have an online survey. They're asking, hey, you know, if you're part of this group, please check this box if you're really interested in learning more about cartography, or if you want to learn some more about going through Python and just what programming basics are, or some other language, or web basics, learning how to create a GitHub repo, or we're absolutely complete new beginners. So what are geospatial concepts? These are some of the things that they asked in their survey to get a sense of what their members needed. So that's one way of doing it. At MapTime Boulder, we had a kind of an unconference, sort of like pitch a topic that you wanted on a piece of paper, and then people would vote like, yeah, that sounds great, I would come to that MapTime if we talked about that. So there are different ways of getting feedback from the people that are in your group. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of topics that I've done or seen. But again, if you go and look at MapTime chapters like the Seattle ones or Salzburg, the different active ones, you can get ideas of what to do. So like I said, this is for beginners. So sometimes you might just have a night where, hey, let's talk about what vector structured data is. What is raster? What's the difference between the two? Maybe even just talking about applications, like have everybody do a thought experiment where they're just like, what would I want to learn about in my research, or just in my hometown, or my hiking trails, or whatever that has a spatial application, and so that you can talk about how geospatial is used. And you can also talk about geospatial concepts that are hard and difficult in a fun way. So for example, the latest MapTime Boulder that I hosted, we talked about projections, and I brought in the all fun bond projection. and the natural earth layers of continents and oceans so that we could make Mappy Valentine's Day cards. But then we dove deeper into what projections are, what they actually mean, how they're constructed, and preserving equal area or different shapes, things like that, and which kinds of projections are good for the kinds of maps that you make. But we were also making Valentine's Day cards at the same time. So trying to keep it light, but learning stuff is, I think, pretty important. So QGIS ends up being a really strong workhorse for all of these different sorts of topics. And obviously I use it a lot. As QGIS has evolved, there have been so many more features built in. So like 3D rendering is a lot more possible now. Dave Murray came into MapTime Mile High here at Auraria Library and gave us a look at that capability, and that was really fun. It's really good for just introducing people to that vector data and raster data format, just showing them how to load layers and then maybe do a scavenger hunt on the web to try and find some GIS data that they might want to pull in QGIS and just get familiar with that user interface that way. Cartography, all sorts of different kinds of things we can use this software for. So speaking of cartography, an example of a really nice setup for a MapTime meetup is Dr. Tobias has a great outline on her GitHub account for doing QGIS Inkscape cartography. So she has this nice workflow where you design a map pin in Inkscape and make it look really fancy and look three-dimensional. And then you can pull that into QGIS. And she made a map of all the past FOSS4G conferences. And it's really cool. I recommend trying to find that and taking a look at it. So she was using Inkscape and pulled it into there. I have GIMP up here as well because maybe you want to do something with photography and pull that into your cartography as well. And so GIMP is a really nice open source for that. So you can do a lot there and just sort of design your workflows. Imagination is really the limit on this. You can do all sorts of fun things. OpenStreetMap data, like I said, is something that has been a really big focus on a lot of the MapTime meetups that I've done. The humanitarian OpenStreetMap and missing map type of projects where you can go to the humanitarian OpenStreetMap tasking manager and look to see what sort of mapping need is out there and go ahead and use satellite data and trace and get people sort of familiar with creating GIS data that goes into OpenStreetMap is a great way to introduce people to it, and then they've got a purpose too that they're mapping for. Also introducing people to OpenStreetMap in a local mapping way. So taking satellite data to map things right around their home region, things that they know, or taking GPS data and using those traces and adding in something where they hiked a trail that they know is out there that isn't in OpenStreetMap, and just kind of giving them that personal touch is really engaging. So another one, and this is kind of a big focus of some of the meetups around here, is coordinated projects. For those that don't know, the Denver Council of Regional Governments have this marvelous data set of planimetrics or building footprints in the Denver metro area. And we have a coordinated project about bringing that data into OpenStreetMap. So Dr. Cog has donated that data set to OSM. And so now we are grouping teams for doing that hands-on import of that data into OpenStreetMap. And if anybody's interested in taking part of that or wants to see a little bit more about it, This URL has a really good description about the workflow and what the purpose of it is and how to get involved. You can also contact me directly about it, but that's something we've been doing a lot in the meetups around the Denver metro area lately. So Mapillary is kind of a fun thing to do as well, because then you can have a field trip and kind of have a little variety in your map time by going outside and pulling in photographic data and using that for ground truthing of mapping things that are in OpenStreetMap. You can also use this to launch the conversation about the tech of photogrammetry and what structure for motion is, because Mapillary is, has all of this open photographic data, but they're also doing this thing in the background where they are building point cloud models of areas where people have contributed a lot of this photo data, but the photo data is open and it belongs to the people that put it up there, and people can take it down at any time. But they also have it as an access layer within OpenStreetMap editing. So if you're trying to add an attribute onto something and you're not sure, you can go and see if people have taken photographs and loaded them up to Mapillary in that space and do some ground truthing and add good data into OpenStreetMap. So that's kind of a fun idea for a meetup or a map time session. Sorry if I interchanged those two by accident. It's confusing in my own head. Doing a Python introduction is also a really great idea for a map time session. Just getting people used to doing some really simple commands in the interactive Python console in QGIS is really great. You can also pre-create a script and then step through it with people. So a future idea that I want to bring to MapTime Mile High that I was teaching in my Intro to GIS for Geologists course is a script that looks at water catchment, and you can look at, okay, I want to get a slope calculation, I want to get an area calculation of that side water catchment, do some hydrology analysis, but then maybe my applied idea is I want to look at that analysis for every side canyon that goes along the Grand Canyon, for example. And obviously you don't want to sit there and click and point and click and point and do all of the graphic user interface for this kind of process, and just the impact of writing a script to do these kinds of things. Or you could use the model builders that are within QGIS as well. It's another way of doing this, but just trying to get that automated workflow concept is another really important lesson to learn. Web mapping, just talking about different kinds of APIs that you can pull in tiles for displaying really beautiful, amazing web maps is a fun thing to do. Rich Donahue's a person that put up a really great thing in a GitHub repo where he was just using leaflet layers and this really fun website that was maps to GPX, where you can take data off of a route that you have in doing a traffic routing thing on an online browser, and then pulling that, making a GPX layer, and then pulling it through geojson.io, just doing all these kind of fun things, and then making a web map by the end of the night. And it's a really fun introduction to working with JavaScript and what HTML and what CSS concepts are, and then just knowing about what those tile maps are out there. This is the kind of session that our next MapTime Mile High is going to be. So if anybody sees this and is interested, we always do it on the fourth Tuesday of every month. So we'll do a web mapping session next, and I'll post that soon. So then there's the type of thing that Dr. Tobias alluded to when she was saying that she had that researcher with this huge data set. So this is just a screenshot of some census data. Actually, if you can, this is actually an old QGIS logo. This is from 2.18. But if your data is huge and your processing times take a while, doing an introduction to working directly with spatial SQL in a database is a really great thing. And last but not least, for some ideas, lightning talks. There is it's a great way to get people to just hash through their own projects, and maybe they're in the middle of it and they just want help and they're like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, what tool should I use here? Or if they've finished that, just kind of talking about the methods that they used to get that final project is a really fun thing to have. And they're not really hack-festy, so you're not sitting down with laptops and doing it, but it's a really great way to start a whole bunch of discussions. But I mean, I could go on with these kind of suggestions, but just whether you're doing an introduction to R, having a session of hand-drawn maps, or doing origami. We did that. We made Christmas ornaments for a MapTime that happened around the holidays. You can do all sorts of different kinds of sessions. But again, it's about knowing what your members want to do. So with the tips and recommendations for doing this, I mentioned this a little bit before, form a team. I'm really lucky in that there is a really strong network of meetup groups and people. I co-lead both of my map times. I mentioned Jennings Anderson, and then there's people that help me out with MapTime Mile High too. So sharing the load of organizing and teaching kind of keeps you from doing burnout. Some of these recommendations are things I need to take to heart that I need to start doing better with having a good GitHub repo and have a place where people can access that knowledge and come back to it is a really great idea. Having a dedicated one for your map time is not a bad idea. Get member input. I mentioned the survey that MapTime Seattle put out. Unconference style polling, or if it's a small group, you can just have a message board conversation through Meetup if that's the way that you communicate with your group. Have a bank account. So Meetup, I should say, is not something that's free. It actually costs about $15 a month to have a meetup group hosted on that site for unlimited members. If you stay under 50 members, it's a little bit less than that, but it's something to think about if you want to have people contribute funds for getting guest speakers, maybe travel money, having money for the food supply if people aren't just volunteering to make cookies as often as you would like. So having a bank account is not such a bad idea. Also finding sponsorship for certain things might be great. The building import project that we had started on here, we had a little pocket, actually I think it was quite a big pocket of sponsorship from Mapbox for a while because they're interested in having these kind of things go forward. So go ahead and search out how you can support your own group or ask for donations from your members to keep it rolling. And like I said, keep it fun but challenging. So that's sort of my overview of what you can do with MapTime and kind of incorporate that into a library space if you have that, if you are a geospatial librarian. Think about using this to pull in members in your community that might not wander onto campus otherwise, or take some of your people off campus and have it at a fun meeting room in a restaurant somewhere nearby. And with that, yeah, that's just a lot of ideas to toss out there, and I'm happy to take questions, or if people just want to email me questions, my email is up here. I'm happy to talk to anybody about this.
Fantastic, Diane. Thank you so much. Everyone, as we said at the beginning, if you have a question, you can use the chat interface. If you roll down your mouse to the bottom of the interface, a menu pops up and you see towards the middle a chat bubble. You can use that to type a question, or you can turn on your mic on the lower left also in that menu and just tell us your question. I'll start with one while the folks jump in.
Mm-hmm.
I was really, I really appreciate what you mentioned in the posting for your presentation, that the library contributes to help us, the faculty, with touching on subjects and areas that probably we don't have enough time or knowledge in our regular classes. And then it's invaluable to have your knowledge and expertise and time putting into the activities that you describe, because then students are exposed to a broader range of technologies, principles, knowledge that probably they wouldn't have because maybe we're too busy covering other topics in class.
Right, and to speak to that a little bit more is a lot of curriculums have been designed and they're really, really hard to adjust, and switching over to a completely different software approach, or maybe kind of tying a little bit into that is difficult, and it's hard because faculty are so stressed for time. And so being able to have different technologies that are available in a casual setting, or just to supplement ways of doing things that might be a different approach or easier depending on what's needed, is a really great thing to host out of libraries if there isn't a concerted FOSS4G curriculum on that campus, wherever it might be. So it just kind of gives a broader dimension. And going back to my background and being sort of software agnostic about things, I always just kind of think about, what do I want to do with research? And then, okay, then how do I find the best way to do that? And different types of tools offer different strengths, and it's good to have that variety.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, folks, if you have a question or comment, again, you can roll your mouse to the bottom and then use the mic or type on the chat. Do you have the chat on your side open?
I do. I'm not seeing anything yet, though.
Yeah, I have a question for you there.
Okay.
So this is Dan. I'm based out of Fort Collins, and there's already kind of quite a few geospatial groups structured already. So like the Geospatial Centroid at CSU, and there's a Northern Colorado meetup group.
Yep.
Is there, I guess, do you feel like I should be talking with them about trying to push into the MapTime structure, or is it, I mean, what's the added benefit to an existing group for going this route?
I would say that with an existing group, you're actually, if that group is satisfying the needs of your community, then you're quite set, actually. So because map times are things to develop in a way where people can get together and have a little sit down with laptops and work on a certain project and power through things, if some of the things that are coming out of the Geospatial Centroid don't feel like that's happening, you could ask them directly, because you don't want to spread your geospatial people too thin, because having too many meetup groups is just going to lead to one of them not surviving because people don't show up, right? So a lot of the things that the meetup groups that do come up there are OpenStreetMap centric, and they do a lot of the humanitarian mapping, which is great. Maybe talk to Beth and see like, hey, maybe would you think about what would happen if we just did a night on looking at cesium? Are you guys open to that? And if that's something that doesn't fit into that, then maybe starting a MapTime chapter there would make sense too. But I would talk to them first and see if you can launch off the momentum that's in there.
Awesome, thank you.
Awesome, perfect. And you know, the other thing that I was thinking as you were presenting is the wide range of things that you guys touch on. And I was wondering, you know, you were talking about reaching to students and the community in general. Do you have a thought or a recommendation of how to reach out more to the people that are not part of the university community? So maybe professionals, maybe even just citizens that are interested in, you know, using OpenStreetMap or any other technology to address an issue or concern that they have.
Yeah, you know, the funny thing is that most of my MapTime Mile High attendees at this point are not students. They are members of the community. And so I would like to get more students to meet them and get some of that interconnectedness for internships and back and forth between the geospatial professionals and students. But to answer your question more directly about encouraging general community members to come in, I think things like the Data to Policy project, where we are connecting with people that don't necessarily have exposure to geospatial, to come in and learn those tools for how to look at problems in their own neighborhood, whether it be let's just make our neighborhood safer, or let's try and get together and map out where gentrification stuff might be happening and build a coalition to make our neighborhood what it is. Going through the Data to Policy project, I might be able to reach more people to have them come in. But it's a chicken and egg sort of situation about what topics do I talk about versus what people actually attend and holding that interest. So it's a little complicated, and I'm also happy to take recommendations and ideas at my email or on chat in addition to questions.
Yeah. Yeah, we're likely to have more. You're likely to have more because when we post to the channel, then people watch the video and then they will reach out to you. That's great, and we appreciate it. So is there any other question or comment at this point? All right, you know, I still have one more. I don't want to hold the microphone for too much, but I want to be, you know, take advantage to having you here. Mm-hmm. So in terms of helping the faculty, do you have any idea of how many other libraries, university libraries, are doing the type of work that you're doing in the realm of open source? Is there like a group within your?
I stopped hearing, but there you are.
Oh, yeah. Do you want me to repeat it?
You're asking how many university libraries have the same kind of FOSS4G support out of them?
Yeah, is there like a national organization or group or international group that you guys communicate with each other?
So there is a group of people that I know through a conference called Geo4Lib Camp. And so just through that, I know a lot of geospatial librarians, some at Stanford, and those are all people that are very focused on this Geo Blacklight project. And so there's that communication network. And then a lot of the people that are in that are also on Twitter on the GIS chat channel that meets every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So Dr. Tobias actually is kind of hosting that a little bit. She at least prompts the questions, but it's a thing that just grows in and of itself, and that's a great network for talking about different kinds of FOSS4G techniques and software. For example, somebody was doing on this campus is interested in working with bringing photogrammetry products into a GIS desktop, and I was just asking a question about that, and at the latest QGIS user conference, somebody gave a presentation on bringing meshes into that software, and I haven't played with it yet, but it blew up on Twitter, and I'm really excited to look into it. So through the GIS chat, and then just the Geo for LibCamp people.
Great, great. We have one question here in the chat. I don't know if you can see this from Amara.
Oh yeah, I see that.
She asked, what is the difference between MapTime and hot groups?
So the humanitarian OpenStreetMap groups are very directed at trying to help with spatial data that goes into OpenStreetMap that is organized around a project with a humanitarian benefit. So it's a very targeted thing. MapTime is where people get together with laptops and do whatever that group chooses to. So it's a lot more free form, depending on what people want to do. So MapTimes can do hot OSM projects as the thing that they pick. Absolutely great. And in fact, hot OSM would love us to do that more. But it's not as focused. Does that make sense, Mara?
Yeah, again, Mara, feel free.
Yes, good evening. It do make sense.
Okay.
I understand that because I'm in the hot group. So, and it's true for the hot group, I was invited for this webinar, and I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, excellent, excellent question. All right, folks, one more question, a couple of questions more. We still have about 3 minutes left. Anyone?
I can share one more thing that I actually, when I was talking, just another idea, and this is kind of a benefit of doing things in a library if you have access to certain tools. One of the activities that we did during a GIS day MapTime was make vector art out of using Quick OSM to pull data out of OpenStreetMap. But in our library, we have a vinyl cutter, and I made this sticker to put on my water bottle out of OSM data. So this is actually my street that I grew up on, and that's my dad's house. So you can do really fun things that just expose people to learning how to work with data, but then they still come out with some kind of interesting product at the end of it.
Yes, indeed, geospatial art.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that's part of the fun, and we're grateful that you keep that light spirit and happy spirit connected to the hardcore, sometimes cold science. So
I need to do more of that too, because that's where I get to learn a lot more too, so.
Perfect. Well, we really appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts, really valuable stuff. I think a lot of people will be inspired or will reach out to you for more information. And thank you so much for being a leader here in our community in keeping Geospatial exciting and fun.
It is fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Diane. We'll see you. Thank you, folks, for joining us. Again, the recording will be posted, and we appreciate your participation. Bye-bye.